He died a millionaire. They came for the money. But when the lawyer read the will, a stranger's name brought the room to a standstill. The church pews sat half full, cloaked in hushed tension rather than grief. A light drizzle tapped gently against the stained glass windows, blurring the pastel colors into something gray and indecipherable. It was a quiet afternoon in suburban Georgia, too quiet for a man who, on paper, had once commanded rooms and led board meetings with a voice that moved millions. Charles Whitmore was dead, and nobody cried. The sanctuary was elegant, understated, like everything Charles had once claimed to be. Polished wood, soft lighting, and a single floral arrangement on the casket. Not too grand, not too humble. Just tasteful enough to suggest importance without inviting intimacy. In the front row sat his family, arranged more like rival board members than mourners. His ex-wife, Meredith, clutched her purse like it contained ammunition. Her lips were pursed, her eyes hidden behind dark Chanel sunglasses that had no place indoors. Beside her, their son Michael tapped his foot, his designer watch catching the light with every impatient glance toward the pulpit. Christine, the daughter, sat stiffly with arms crossed, elegant, poised, but distant. Her black dress was tailored, her heels too high for a funeral. She hadn't looked at the casket once. Behind them sat Charles's siblings, aunts, uncles, all dressed appropriately, all avoiding eye contact. There were no tears, no handkerchiefs passed down the pew. Just the occasional whisper. Didn't even visit him in hospice. He cut me out years ago, you know that. Just wait, let's see what the will says. Eyes flickered from the coffin to the lawyer seated near the back. Others glanced at their phones, checking the time. One man stifled a yawn behind his gloved hand. It wasn't mourning, it was anticipation dressed in black. But not every seat held someone familiar. In the very last row, near the exit, sat a man no one acknowledged. A quiet presence. Black, mid-40s, weathered face, calloused hands folded respectfully in his lap. He wore a plain suit, not ill-fitting, but lived in. A suit that had been worn to more funerals than weddings. He didn't speak. He didn't shift. He simply watched. His name wasn't mentioned in the program. No one greeted him. He wasn't part of the family photos on the memorial table, nor in any of the whispered conversations. But as the pastor spoke in gentle platitudes, a man of integrity, a pillar of the community, this man in the back blinked slowly, and for the briefest moment, looked like the only person in the room who had actually known Charles Whitmore. The ceremony passed in a blur of formality. A hymn sung without soul, a eulogy read like a LinkedIn profile. No laughter, no fond stories, no cracked voices or trembling hands, just the bare minimum. When it was over, people moved quickly. Some headed for the lawyer, others for the parking lot. Meredith didn't linger near the casket. Michael answered a phone call before he even stood up. Christine didn't say goodbye. She just fixed her coat and walked, but the man in the back stayed seated. Just a little longer. Then, with a soft exhale, he rose and walked out alone. No one noticing, no one asking his name. The door closed behind him with a hollow click, and so ended the funeral of Charles Whitmore. A man mourned not with love, but with legal expectations. The real story hadn't even begun. His name was Eli Harris. He hadn't come to the funeral for closure. He wasn't there to be seen or to be part of the spectacle that Charles Whitmore's family was turning it into. He came because it felt right. Quietly, without announcement, Eli slipped in through the side door, took a seat in the last pew, and watched the ceremony unfold with tired but observant eyes. Eli was a maintenance worker. For nearly 15 years, he'd been the man behind the scenes in one of the older residential buildings on the edge of town. He fixed leaking pipes at 3 a.m., unclogged drains tenants were too embarrassed to speak of, and replaced decades-old wiring with the patience of a surgeon. His apartment on the ground floor near the boiler room was small but tidy. A second-hand recliner faced a modest TV. On the windowsill, a small fern leaned toward the light, one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. He didn't own a car. He took the same route to work every day, rain or shine. He didn't have much, and he asked for even less. But what he did have, he held with quiet dignity. He greeted the mail carrier by name. He remembered birthdays of tenants' children, and when someone slipped an envelope of cash under his door at Christmas, he never mentioned it, but always made sure their broken heater was fixed by morning. So when Charles Whitmore, retired banker, well-dressed, well-connected, started showing up at Eli's building years ago, it turned more than a few heads. The first time, Charles had parked crooked near the loading dock, sweating under the southern sun, his vintage Mercedes sputtering smoke. Eli had offered help without fanfare. Popped. The hood found the issue, patched it up with nothing more than elbow grease and a stripped screw. "You charge for miracles?" Charles had asked, half joking. Eli had just shrugged. "Only if I write a receipt. You didn't ask for one." From that day on, Charles kept coming back. Not with repairs, those were rare, but with something stranger. He'd bring coffee in mismatched mugs or lunch in plastic containers. Sometimes he brought nothing at all. They would sit by the building's side steps, near the maintenance door, where no one cared to look. They talked, at first about practical things, car parts, the cost of living, weather. But slowly those conversations grew deeper. Charles would speak in half-confessions, about the pressure of being needed but never really known, about how wealth insulated him, even from his own family. And Eli? He mostly listened. Sometimes they'd sit for hours, long after the sun dipped, past the rooftop. No pretense, no agendas. It was the only place Charles wasn't Mr. Whitmore, and the only place Eli wasn't invisible. Eli never told anyone about those meetings. He never posted photos, never mentioned it to neighbors, never hinted at their odd friendship. He didn't feel the need to. "Not everything real needs to be seen," he once said. More to himself than anyone else. He didn't know then how much that truth would matter one day. So when Charles died and the world around him erupted into suspicion, greed, and confusion, Eli remained what he had always been, the man in the corner, silent, steady, and holding a story no one thought to ask about. The mahogany-paneled office smelled faintly of old books, leather, and entitlement. A storm brewed outside, casting long shadows across the brass fixtures and dark carpet. The Whitmore family had arrived early, but not out of grief. There were no condolences exchanged, no shared memories. Only carefully concealed anticipation. Christine Whitmore sat at the head of the polished conference table, her manicured fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on a folder embossed with her initials. Her expression was controlled, but her posture screamed certainty. She was the eldest, after all, the only one who had truly understood the business, as she often reminded people. The house, Charles's prized colonial estate in Buckhead, was already hers in her mind. Next to her lounged Michael, half listening, his suit unbuttoned and his smile smug. He had brought sunglasses indoors, which now rested on the table beside a stainless steel travel mug. He wasn't worried. The investment accounts, the stocks, those were his. "Dad always said I was the only one who cared about ROI," he'd bragged once at a Christmas party. Meredith, Charles's ex-wife, arrived last, draped in designer black, her red lipstick deliberately bold. She'd married Charles in their 20s, raised his children, endured his success, and when it all fell apart, she'd left with bitterness and just enough alimony to keep quiet. But she wasn't here for silence today. "He owes me," she muttered as she settled into her chair. "For the years, for the sacrifices, for the humiliation." The air was thick with unspoken expectations. Even the lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, a gray-haired man with weary eyes and a gold watch that didn't match his scuffed briefcase, seemed to feel it. He cleared his throat, opened the folder, and began reading. Charles Whitmore's voice echoed through Reynolds's tone. Formal, precise, cold. "I, Charles Emmett Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare," the legalities dragged on, "bequests to distant cousins, a donation to a local library, his watch collection to a fraternity brother." The children exchanged knowing looks. None of this touched the real wealth, the real inheritance. Christine straightened when the house was mentioned. Her smile barely, twitched when it was confirmed, as expected. Michael leaned back, hands behind his head when the investment portfolio was detailed. Nearly $3 million in assets, just as he'd calculated. And then Reynolds paused. There is one final provision. Christine raised a brow. Michael smirked. A life insurance policy. Substantial in size. Untouched. Total value. $5 million. Now they were alert. Meredith leaned in. Reynolds looked down at the page, then up, at the family. The sole beneficiary is listed as Eli Harris, Islands. It was the kind of silence that doesn't settle. It stabs, chokes, fills a room like smoke. Christine's lips parted, but no sound came out. Michael sat forward so fast his chair groaned. Meredith blinked, once, slowly, as if the name had been spoken in a foreign language. Who? Christine finally demanded, her voice sharp. Who is that? Reynolds adjusted his glasses. Eli Harris. I believe he's a maintenance worker. Lived in the Midtown complex. Your father had ongoing contact with him. Michael scoffed. Ongoing. Contact. My father didn't do ongoing contact with anybody outside a golf club. Meredith's face darkened. This must be a mistake. That money was for family. It was supposed to come back to us. The lawyer cleared his throat again. But this time it trembled faintly. I can assure you it's legally binding. Charles specified it himself. The beneficiary designation was notarized just 3 months before his passing. Christine slammed her hand on the table. No, this doesn't make sense. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't give that kind of money to someone no one even knows. But someone did know. Charles had. And now, in the heart of a stormy afternoon, the foundation of their expectations cracked wide open. The money was gone. To someone never mentioned, never invited, never counted. Eli Harris. The thunder outside had quieted, but the storm inside the Whitmore estate was just getting started. Christine paced the length of the marble foyer, heels clacking like gunshots against polished stone. He's a con artist, she said through gritted teeth. He saw a vulnerable old man and latched on like a leech. Michael sat slumped on the edge of a leather couch, scrolling through his phone. Dad must have been losing it. Dementia, maybe. No way he'd give everything to some janitor. Meredith stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed on the driveway as if expecting Eli to arrive with a moving truck. I gave that man the best years of my life, she hissed. And this is what he leaves me with? Nothing? They refused to let it go. Within 48 hours, Christine had hired a private investigator. Colin Marks, discreet, tenacious, morally flexible, came, highly recommended among Atlanta's elite. His mission was simple. Find the dirt. Find the connection. Find anything to prove that Eli Harris had manipulated, coerced, or blackmailed Charles Whitmore. Start at the building he worked in, Christine ordered, and don't stop until you find something worth suing over. Meanwhile, Eli remained, unchanged. News of the inheritance had reached him. He'd received a call from the insurance company, a letter from the lawyer, even a few reporters knocking at his door. But he didn't speak to anyone. He didn't cash the check. He didn't buy a new car or upgrade his clothes. He still showed up to work at 6:45 a.m., toolbox in hand, nodding politely to neighbors who now looked at him differently. And still, he said nothing. He always was quiet, a tenant said during one of Colin's interviews. But kind. You, no salt-of-the-earth kind, would fix your sink and ask how your mother's doing in the hospital. That kind of man. Another neighbor remembered a night, maybe 2 years ago, when a fancy car had pulled into the back alley. Didn't fit in around here, she'd said. But the driver, this older white guy, just sat on the stairs with Eli for hours. Thought maybe it was his uncle or something. It wasn't. Colin dug deeper. At a small diner near the complex, an elderly waitress recalled a strange night. Came in real late, she said, pouring coffee. Eli dragging some white man who looked half dead. Said he found him slumped over the wheel in the parking lot. Called 911 but waited till the ambulance came. Wouldn't leave him. Sat in the back of the squad car just praying. It wasn't in any newspaper. There was no police report that mentioned Eli by name, but buried in the hospital's incident logs, Colin found it. Charles Whitmore, cardiac episode. Admitted 1:32 a.m. Brought in by unidentified black male. No one else knew. No one else had been there. Just two men. A moment. And a silence kept for years. When Christine received the investigator's report, she sat alone in her late father's study, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. Every line chipped away at the story she had built in her mind, of a thief, a manipulator, a man who didn't deserve what her father had given him. And yet, Eli had never asked for anything. Not then. Not now. Her jaw tightened. He bought. Your silence, she muttered to the photo on the desk, a portrait of Charles smug in a tailored suit. He didn't reward you. He paid you off. That's all this was. But the bitterness didn't ease the ache. It only deepened it. And somewhere across town, Eli climbed a rusted ladder to fix a broken light, unaware that his name had become both the target of rage and the keeper of a truth no one else had earned. The study smelled of cedar and faded ink, a stillness hanging in the air like a breath that had never been released. Dust clung to the windowsill where the sun tried, weakly, to pour through half-drawn blinds. The desk, once Charles Whitmore's command post, remained untouched since his passing, its surface orderly in the way that suggested control, not sentiment. Christine stood in the doorway for a long moment, reluctant to enter. It had always been her father's sanctuary, a place where laughter was unwelcome and vulnerability never dared to show itself. Now, it felt like a mausoleum made of mahogany and paper. She crossed the room and opened the bottom drawer, almost without thinking. Maybe she was searching for a loophole. Maybe she wanted one more piece of evidence to prove Eli Harris had done something, anything, to deserve $5 million over his own blood. But instead, she found a box. It was plain, cardboard, unmarked, a banker's box, the kind used to store old tax returns or legal files. Yet when she removed the lid, what she saw made her breath catch. Letters. Dozens of them, maybe more. Each one in her father's handwriting. Each one addressed simply to Mr. Eli Harris, Midtown Maintenance Room, Atlanta. Gashi reached for one, hands suddenly unsure. The envelope was sealed but unmailed, postmarked with no date. She opened it. Eli, I wanted to thank you again for the coffee. I know it seems small, but you brought it the morning after the board stripped my title, and somehow you knew I didn't want to be alone that day. You didn't ask what happened. You just sat there. That silence. It saved me from drowning. In my own shame. She blinked, swallowed, opened another. I've spent my life surrounded by men who shook my hand while waiting for what I'd give them. You never once asked. Not even after the heart attack. You showed up at that hospital like I was your own brother. Do you know how long it's been since someone did something for me without expecting a favor in return? Letter after letter. Some short, some pages long, some angry, others tender. Many written in ink that had faded, the handwriting more unsteady. In the later ones, and then she found one, no envelope, just folded and creased in half. A confession written with the clarity of a dying man. I watched them pass you over again and again at the bank. I saw them laugh when you spoke up in meetings, how they called you help, even when you saved their entire systems from crashing. You stayed. You worked. You never let them break you. You were the only man in my life who never asked me for anything. That's why I gave you everything. Christine sat back slowly in her father's chair. Her spine sagged, the weight of it, all finally pressing down. This wasn't manipulation. It wasn't a con. Her father hadn't been fooled. He'd finally seen someone. Really seen them. And it hadn't been her. The box of letters sat open on the desk. The room was quiet. No lawyers, no accusations, no brothers trying to calculate. Stock values. Just Christine, alone, reading truths that had never been meant for her eyes, and for the first time since the funeral, she cried, not for the money, but for the father she never really knew. The knock on the front door came on a quiet morning, the kind that felt too still, too settled after weeks of storm. Christine opened it herself, unsure what or who she was expecting. It was him. Eli Harris stood on the porch, the rising sun, casting a golden outline around his frame. He wore the same worn suit from the funeral, pressed clean but frayed at the cuffs. His posture was straight, respectful, his eyes calm. Christine stared at him for a beat too long, unsure if she should invite him in or slam the door shut. Instead, she stepped aside. The Whitmore estate, once cold and immaculate, now felt like a place haunted by absence. Absent affection, absent understanding, absent truth. Eli walked slowly through the foyer, removing his hat, eyes scanning the portraits on the wall. He said nothing for a moment. Then finally he spoke. "Didn't come for money," he said softly, voice edged with quiet resolve. "Didn't come for thanks, didn't come to stir anything up." Meredith appeared from the hallway, frozen at the sight of him. Michael looked up from his laptop, blinking, like Eli had just stepped out of a dream they thought had ended. No one said a word. "I came because I didn't want the last thing Mr. Whitmore gave to become something that tore this family apart," Eli continued. "He told me once, in a moment I think he meant to forget, that he didn't know how to be a good man, just a successful one." He paused, eyes resting briefly on Christine. "But the truth is, in the end, he tried." Christine's lips parted, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. "I never asked him for anything," Eli said. "But what he gave me wasn't just money. He gave me the dignity to choose, the freedom to do something that mattered." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper. He placed it on the table. "No lawyer, no press. I already donated most of it," he said. "Community clinic down on Edgewood. New wings going up next spring, scholarships too for kids who look like me coming from where I came from." Michael stood now, staring at him. "You gave it away?" Eli met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't need a new life, just a chance to honor the man I got to know, not the man you wrote off." Meredith scoffed, barely audible, but even she looked shaken, not by anger this time, but something closer to shame. Eli turned to the door. "I don't need your forgiveness, or your friendship," he said as he opened it. "But I hope one day you'll understand he wasn't trying to punish you. He just wanted to be remembered for one good thing." Christine's voice caught in her throat as she finally found the strength to whisper, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He stopped, half out the door. "Not everything real needs to be seen," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting with the faintest trace of peace. And then he left. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence anymore. It was heavier, and somehow purer. They hadn't just lost money. They'd lost the chance to see the man Charles Whitmore had finally become, reflected in the quiet grace of the one person they never thought to know. The sun hung low over Atlanta, casting a warm amber hue across the freshly painted walls of the Edgewood Community Clinic. The new wing stood proudly beneath a bright white sign that caught the light just right: the Charles E. Whitmore Healing Center, but just beneath the engraved name in smaller, unassuming letters etched in brass. Inspired by Eli Harris. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no television cameras, just quiet hands tending to quiet needs. Inside, the air buzzed softly with purpose. Nurses moved through the hallways with gentle urgency. Volunteers stocked shelves, folded linens, refilled waiting room coffee trays. Among them moved Christine Whitmore. Her once perfectly tailored blouses had given way to plain scrubs and a pulled-back ponytail. No one addressed her as Ms. Whitmore. She never corrected them. She didn't need to be seen. She organized medical supplies with a kind of care that wasn't in her blood months ago. Now she listened. She paused when patients spoke. She smiled at the children coloring in the corner. Something in her had settled, less sharp, less hungry. And though she never said it aloud, everyone around her could feel it. She'd stopped, waiting to inherit something from her father. She was becoming something of her own. Outside, on a quiet bench beneath the clinic's oak tree, Eli sat with a book open on his knee. A little boy beside him leaned into the story, pointing at the pictures, asking questions, laughing without fear. Eli nodded along, turning the page slowly, listening more than he spoke. Christine stepped out into the sunlight, pausing as she saw them. He looked up, their eyes met, just for a moment. There was no speech, no apology, no grand reckoning, just a silent understanding, a small nod, and then she walked past.